Did she surround herself with the same forces that had saved her life? Or was it something more significant than that? She believed that it was. Vienna eventually woke up to find that night had fallen. The sky was a deep velvety blue, illuminated by bright white stars. The chilly breeze played with her hair, and she saw Norris's profile, sharp and bold against the sky, through the waving strands. As her body grew weary, her mind began to struggle to grasp her situation, and she felt like she was in a dream. A heavy drowsiness, like a blanket, started to envelop her, and she swayed and drifted. As she dozed off, she felt a muffled throb near her ear, something sweet, deep and unfamiliar, like a distant bell ringing. She fell asleep with her head resting on Norris's chest. Chapter 13. 3 days had passed since Vienna's return to the ranch, and she couldn't feel any aches or pains from her recent escapades. This was a surprise to her, but what surprised her even more was how quickly she began to forget the whole ordeal. If it weren't for the constant watchful eyes of her cowboys, she might have completely blocked out memories of Don Carlos and the raiders. Vienna knew that she was in great physical shape thanks to the demanding ranch life, and she was starting to adopt the Western attitude of fearlessness. Vienna's life had changed drastically since she was captured by Don Carlos and rescued by Jean. She was now the owner of a ranch and had many interesting things brought to her attention on a daily basis. Stillwell, the superintendent, was always worried about her safety and trusted Norris the most to keep an eye on her. One day, Stillwell came into Vienna's office with some news about Jean. He had once again ridden off into the mountains and was seen meeting with Padre Marcos. Vienna wondered if he was taking money to the guerrillas, but Stillwell explained that he had already done that before. Monty and Nels had been causing trouble for Jean lately, and Stillwell predicted that they would soon come to blows. Vienna joked that maybe Norris was getting religious, but Stillwell dismissed that idea after hearing Jean curse Monty that morning. Vienna listened to all of this with interest, knowing that her life was never going to be boring again. "I've got a lot on my mind," Vienna said to Stillwell. "Let Norris go on his mysterious trips to the mountains. I have news that might worry you. I received letters from home, and my sister is coming out to visit me with some of her society friends, including an English lord." "Well, Miss Princess, I reckon we'll all be happy to see them," replied Stillwell, "unless they decide to send you back east." "That's unlikely," Vienna responded thoughtfully. "But I do have to go back at some point. Let me read you some excerpts from my sister's letter." Vienna picked up the letter with a strange feeling of nostalgia for the life she had left behind. She scanned the pages of her sister's beautiful handwriting, which was filled with anticipation for the fun she expected to have with bashful cowboys. Vienna was annoyed by the satirical tone of the letter and the fact that her sister seemed to be reveling in the prospect of new sensations. Melissa was completely ignorant of the West and expected to hunt buffalo and fight Indians, much like the English lord in her party. After reading a few paragraphs aloud, Stillwell snorted and his face turned red. "Did your sister really write this?" he asked. "Yes," Vienna replied. "Well, I beg your pardon, Miss Princess, but it doesn't seem like something you would say. Does she think we're a bunch of wild men from Borneo?" "Evidently she does," Vienna said with a hint of annoyance. "But I think she's in for a surprise. Now, Stillwell, you're clever and can see the situation. I want my guests to have a blast while they're here, but not at the expense of anyone's feelings. Melissa is bringing a lively crowd who are looking for something out of the ordinary. Let's make sure we give them just that. Talk to the boys and let them know what to expect so they can be prepared. I'll help you with that. When the boys are off duty, I want them to be on dress parade and on their best behavior. I don't care what they do to protect themselves or what tricks they come up with, as long as they're kind and courteous. I want them to take this seriously and act as if they've always lived this way. My guests are expecting a good time, so let's give it to them. What do you say?" Stillwell stood up, his massive frame towering over everyone else and his face beaming. "Well, I think it's the most amazing idea I've ever heard," he exclaimed. "I'm glad you like it," Vienna said. "After you talk to the boys, come back to me. But I have to admit I'm a little worried. You know how cowboys like to have fun. Maybe—" "Don't worry about a thing," Stillwell interrupted. "Leave the boys to me. They all swear by you, just like the Mexicans swear by the Virgin. They won't let you down, Miss Princess. They'll be simply amazing. It'll be better than any show you've ever seen." Vienna still had her doubts, but she couldn't help but be swept up in Stillwell's enthusiasm. "All right, then, it's settled. My guests will arrive on May 9th. As they prepared for the arrival of their guests at her princess's rancho, Vienna and Florence noticed a thin streak of white dust rising from the distant valley. Upon closer inspection with binoculars, they realized it was Link Stevens and the automobile carrying their guests. Vienna remembered her conversation with Stevens about the condition of the car and the road, hoping to impress their New York guests with a fast and safe ride. As they watched the car approach, Stillwell's face was filled with delight. It was time for the invasion of their ranch by their city friends. "So, if I drive carefully and safely, I can leave the dust behind and get here faster than the greasers tomorrow?" Vienna asked, seeking confirmation from Stevens. He nodded in agreement, and Vienna couldn't help but laugh. As she watched the thin streak of dust moving at a snail's pace, she began to doubt her decision. She trusted Stevens, who was a skilled, daring, and iron-nerved driver. However, the thought of him driving on 40 miles and more of that desert road made her feel guilty for putting him in danger. "Oh, Stillwell," Vienna exclaimed. "I'm afraid I'll go back on my wonderful idea. What made me do it?" "Your sister wanted the real thing, didn't she? Said they all wanted it. Well, I reckon they've begun getting it," replied Stillwell, the cattleman. Vienna's conscience was somewhat relieved by Stillwell's statement. She longed to see her old friends and hear the soft laughter and gay repartee of her past. However, there was a small part of her that felt hostile towards the expected guests. They were curious and scornful about the western ranch that had claimed her. Vienna wondered if her sister or friends would ever see the West as she saw it. She knew it was a long shot. Nevertheless, she hoped that they would get a glimpse of the real thing, just like Stillwell said. She had made up her mind to show her guests the true beauty of life in the Southwest. "Well, as Nels says, I wouldn't be caught dead in that car right now for $1,000,000, Stillwell commented. "Why, is Stevens driving too fast?" "Good Lord, fast. Miss Princess, there hasn't been anything except lightning run so fast in this country. I bet Link is in heaven right now. I can just see him hunching down over that wheel like it's a horse's neck." "I told him not to make the ride too hot or dusty," Vienna said. "Haw, haw," Stillwell laughed. "Well, I'm heading out. I want to be here when Link drives up, but I also want to be with the boys down by the bunks. It'll be fun to see Nels and Monty when Link comes racing along." "I wish Al had stayed to meet them," Vienna said. Her brother had rushed a shipment of cattle to California, and Vienna suspected he had welcomed the chance to leave the ranch. "I'm sorry he left," Florence replied. "But Al's all business now, and he's doing great. Maybe it's for the best." "Surely, that was just my pride talking. I wish all my family and friends could see what a man Al has become. Well, Link Stevens is driving like the wind. The car will be here any moment. Florence, we only have a few minutes to get ready. But first, I want to order lots of cold refreshments for our guests." Less than 30 minutes later, Vienna returned to the porch and found Florence waiting there. "Oh, you look stunning," Florence exclaimed as she looked up at Vienna. "And somehow different." Vienna smiled a bit sadly. As she slipped into her exquisite white gown, something came over her. Perhaps it was the manner in which the dress befitted her. She couldn't resist the urge to impress her hypercritical friends with her beauty. The melancholic smile was reserved for days gone by, for she knew that her beauty, once praised by society, had tripled since it was last seen in a drawing room. Vienna didn't wear any jewels, but she had pinned 2 great crimson roses at her waist. Against the dead white of the dress, these roses had the life, fire, and redness of the desert. Florence exclaimed, "Link's hit the old roundup trail, and oh, isn't he riding that car?" For most cowboys, including Florence, a car was not driven but ridden. A white spot with a long trail of dust appeared low down in the valley. It was now headed almost straight for the ranch. Vienna watched it grow larger moment by moment, and her pleasurable emotion grew accordingly. Then the rapid beat of a horse's hooves caused her to turn. Norris was riding in on his black horse. He had been away on an important mission that took him to the international boundary line. His unexpected presence was particularly gratifying to Vienna, for it meant that his mission had been brought to a successful conclusion. Once again, for the 100th time, Vienna was struck by the man's reliability. He was a doer of things. The black horse halted wearily without the usual pound of hooves on the gravel, and the dusty rider dismounted wearily. Both horse and rider showed the heat and dust and wind of many miles. Vienna advanced to the porch steps, and Norris, after taking a parcel of papers from a saddlebag, turned toward her. "Norris, you are the best of couriers," she said. "I am pleased." Dust streamed from his sombrero as he doffed it. With a tired sigh, Norris straightened his shoulders and approached Vienna with the reports she had requested. As he looked up to see her dressed in her finest attire to greet her Eastern guests, he paused momentarily, recalling the night she had revealed her true identity. It wasn't fear or awkwardness that caused him to pause, but rather a strong force that compelled him to halt. Vienna noticed the sudden pause and met his gaze, feeling a warmth rise to her cheeks. She rarely blushed, and the sudden sensation was irritating. She accepted the reports from Norris and thanked him as he led his horse down the path towards the corrals. Florence commented that when Norris looked weary, he had been riding, but when his horse looked tired, he had been riding hard. Vienna watched the horse and rider disappear and pondered what had made her thoughtful. It was the change in Norris's gaze that had struck her. His inscrutable, burning eyes had suddenly become beautiful, expressing a strange joy of pride. It wasn't a gaze of love or passion, but something else entirely. Vienna pondered the meaning behind Norris's expression, trying to comprehend the inexplicable. Vienna had never seen a man with such an expression before. It was so peculiar that it made her blush. The longer she spent with these outdoor men, the more they surprised her. She couldn't understand why Cowboy Norris was so proud or happy to see her. Florence's exclamation drew Vienna's attention back to the approaching automobile. It was on the slope now, a few miles down the gradual hill. 2 yellow clouds of dust shot out from behind the car and joined the column that stretched down the valley. "I wonder what it would be like to ride a mile a minute," said Florence. "I'll make Link take me. Oh, but look at him come." The giant car looked like a white demon, and if it weren't for the dust, it would have appeared to be sailing in the air. Its movement was steady, as if it were on rails, and its speed was astonishing. Long gray veils streamed in the wind, and a low rushing sound became audible. The car shot past the alfalfa field, the bunkhouses, and the cowboys, who cheered as it went by. The horses and burros in the corrals began to snort and tramp and race in fright. At the base of the long slope of the foothill, Link reduced the speed by more than half. Yet the car roared up, rolling the dust, flying capes and veils and ulsters, and crashed and cracked to a halt in the yard before the porch. Vienna could see a gray, disheveled mass of humanity packed inside the car. There were 7 occupants besides the driver, and for a moment they appeared to be coming to life, moving and exclaiming under their veils and wraps and dust shields. Link Stevens stepped out and, removing his helmet and goggles, coolly looked at his watch. "An hour and a quarter, Miss Florentino," he said. "It's 63 miles by the valley road, and there's a couple of tricky hills. But we made pretty good time, considering you wanted me to drive slow and safe." The passengers in the car murmured and complained, mostly the women. Vienna stepped forward onto the porch, and the voices of the men and women joined together in a joyful exclamation, "Princess!" Melissa Florentino, Vienna's younger sister, arrived looking worn out from the journey. She was a pretty girl with brown hair and eyes, unlike Vienna's fair complexion. After being shown to her room and catching her breath, she began to talk. "Princess, I made it, but I never would have come if I had known about that car ride from the train station. I thought we would be taking a stagecoach or something like that. That car was enormous, and the road was terrible. And what about that strange little man with the leather pants? What kind of chauffeur is he?" "He's a cowboy. He was injured in a horse accident, so I had him trained to drive the car. Do you think he did a good job?" Vienna replied. "A good job? He scared us all to death except for Mountcastle. Nothing could faze that unflappable Englishman. I'm still dizzy from the ride. When I saw the car, I was excited. But then your cowboy driver met us at the station. He looked so strange with that big gun strapped to his waist. It made me nervous. And then he made me sit next to him in the front seat, even though I didn't want to. I was silly enough to tell him I liked to go fast. You know what he said?" "But after that ride, I think I prefer a slower pace," replied Melissa, still trying to catch her breath. The man who had driven them to the ranch had given them a warning about the journey, but Melissa had not been prepared for the intensity of the wind and dust. The car had seemed to fly down the endless road, and Melissa had felt both fascinated and terrified by the speed. The wind had torn at her clothes, and she had been afraid she would be stripped bare. But finally, after what felt like an eternity, the car had come to a stop, and there stood Vienna waiting for them. Vienna teased Melissa about her love for speed, but Melissa was not amused. She was still recovering from the harrowing ride, and she knew that she would be more cautious in the future. She had learned that sometimes the journey can be just as important as the destination, and it was better to take things slow and steady. "I ain't never been in a fast car before, never seen a road, and never met a driver," I said, feeling a bit nervous as Melissa drove us through the wild and woolly West. "Well, I reckon I might have a few surprises for you," Melissa replied with a mischievous glint in her dark eyes. As we pulled up to Vienna's beautiful home, Melissa couldn't help but express her surprise at how stunning Vienna looked. "You're the handsomest thing I ever laid eyes on," Melissa said, admiring Vienna's strong and beautiful appearance. Vienna was clearly pleased to have her guests admiring her home, and even found herself enjoying the company of the imperturbable Englishman Mountcastle. She felt her capacity for liking others had grown, and even found herself rediscovering her old love for her younger sister, Melissa. Despite the smaller party than expected, Vienna was looking forward to a delightful and memorable visit with her guests. Melissa had brought news from the East, and Vienna was eager to hear all about it. Melissa had carefully chosen her companions for the evening, all of whom were well known to Vienna. Lorraine Wayne was a serious, soft-spoken brunette with a kind heart, despite her past experiences. Mrs. Carrollton Beck, a plain but lively woman, acted as chaperone for the group. The final member of the female contingent was Miss Dorothy Coombs, a young woman with attractive blonde features. Mountcastle, the only man in the group, was quite small in stature. His pink and white complexion, small golden mustache, and drooping eyelids made him appear dull. But his exaggerated English-style attire drew attention to his diminutive size. Robert Weed, a large and florid young man, was known for his good nature. Boyd Harvey, a handsome and carefree fellow, completed the party. The dinner was a happy affair, enjoyed by all. The Mexican women who served the meal could not help but notice the success of the gathering. The low voices, laughter, and superficial talk of the group transported Vienna back in time. Although she did not wish to return to that era, she realized it was important to maintain connections with her friends and community. As the party moved to the porch, the heat of the day began to dissipate, and the red sun sank over the desert. The visitors were struck by the beauty of the sunset, and a deep silence descended upon the group. Just as the last curve of the red rim disappeared beyond the Sierra Madres and the golden lightning began to flare brighter, Melissa broke the silence with a simple statement. "It wants only life." "Oh, look, there's a horse climbing up that hill," Vienna exclaimed, her eyes fixed on the distant figure. "And there's a rider, too." Vienna knew who it was before she even looked properly. She realized then how much she had become accustomed to watching for him at this time of day. The horse and rider made their way along the mesa's rim and out to the point where they stood out against the golden backdrop. Melissa, curious as ever, asked, "What's he doing up there? Who is he?" "That's Norris, my right-hand man," Vienna replied. "He comes up here every day when he's at the ranch. I think he enjoys the ride and the view, but he also checks on the cattle down in the valley." "Is he a cowboy?" Melissa asked. Vienna laughed. "Absolutely. You'll know it when Stillwell gets a hold of you and starts talking about him." Vienna took it upon herself to explain who Stillwell was and what he thought of Norris. She even added a few details about Norris's reputation. "He's known as El Capitan," she said. "How interesting," Melissa mused. "What does he look like?" "He's absolutely superb," Vienna replied. Florence handed Melissa the field glass. "Take a look for yourself." Melissa peered through the glass. "Oh, thank you, there he is. He really is superb, and his horse is magnificent. They both look like they're carved in stone." Dorothy Coombs eagerly asked for a turn with the field glass. Melissa handed it over but warned, "He's mine. I saw him first." Vienna's guests then held a playful contest over the field glass, 3 of them even making bold, teasing claims to Melissa's self-proclaimed rights. Vienna laughed along with them, but her eyes remained fixed on the dark figure of Norris and his horse silhouetted against the sky. As Vienna gazed into the vast expanse of the desert, she couldn't help but wonder what was going through Norris's mind. This thought was nothing new or unusual, but it lingered nonetheless. She made a mental note to ask him about it some day. As Norris rode down into the shadows cast by the mesa, Melissa interrupted Vienna's thoughts. "Princess, have you planned any fun or excitement for us?" Melissa fidgeted, unable to sit still for even a moment. "You'll see," Vienna replied with a mischievous grin. "We'll be going on rides and climbs and playing golf, of course, but that's just to prepare you for the real adventure. I want to take you all to Arizona, show you the desert and the Aravaipa Canyon. We'll have to pack our gear and travel on horseback, and if any of you are still alive after that, we'll head up into the mountains." Lorraine smiled, intrigued. "What is it that each of us wants, specifically?" she asked. "I'll tell you what I want," Melissa chimed in. "I want Dot to find a cowboy who will gaze into her eyes and recite poetry. If cowboys don't make love like that, then Dot's visit will be a failure. Elsie just wants revenge for being dragged out here, so she's hoping something dreadful will happen to us." I have no idea what's going on in Lorraine's head, but it's not fun. Bobby just wants to be near Elsie, and that's it. Boyd wants the one thing he's always wanted but never got. And as for Mountcastle, well, he's got a bloodthirsty desire to kill something. "I want to ride and camp out too," Mountcastle declared, eager to join in on the adventure. "I don't know what I want," Melissa began, "but I do know that I want to be outside, to feel the sun and wind on my skin, and to get some color on my pale face. I'm exhausted and I need to feel alive again. As for the rest, I'm not quite sure. I just hope Dot doesn't flirt with all the cowboys." Vienna responded, "You have quite a range of desires, Princess. But above all, we all want something exciting to happen." Melissa nodded in agreement and added, "I just want to feel like something is happening in my life." Vienna turned to their old friend Lorraine and asked, "What about you, Lorraine? What's your deepest desire?" Lorraine hesitated for a moment before answering, "I just wanted to spend some time with you all." Vienna sensed something deeper in Lorraine's response, as if she too had a longing to break free from her own constraints. It saddened Vienna to think of all the women who might feel the same way but lacked the courage to act on their desires. Chapter 14. During the following days it was debated amongst Vienna's guests, cowboys, and Vienna herself, who was having the most fun during this whirlwind of excitement. Vienna believed that the cowboys were having the time of their lives, especially considering the monotony of their daily routine. However, Stillwell and Norris found it difficult to keep up with the situation. The ranch work needed to be done, but they couldn't resist the ladies or the excitement that the cowboys brought. Fortunately, Norris managed to keep the cattle-raising business afloat by tirelessly working from dawn till dusk. He even had to push the lazy Mexicans he had hired to help the cowboys. One sunny June morning, Vienna sat on her porch with her merry friends when Stillwell appeared on the path leading to the corral. His absence from consulting Vienna for several days was unusual and did not go unnoticed. "Here comes Bill in trouble," Florence laughed. As he approached the porch, he bore a faint resemblance to a thundercloud. However, the greetings he received from Vienna's party, especially from Melissa and Dorothy, chased away the blackness from his face and brought out his wonderful wrinkling smile. "Miss Princess, sure, I'm a sad, demoralized old cattleman," he said eventually, "and I'm in need of a heap of help." "What's wrong now?" asked Vienna with her encouraging smile. "Well, it's so amazingly strange what cowboys will do. I'm about to give up. You might say my cowboys were all on strike for vacations. What do you think of that? We've changed the shifts, shortened hours, let one and another off duty, hired greasers, and in fact done everything that could be thought of. But this vacation idea grew worse. When Norris set his foot down, then the boys began to get sick. Never in my born days as a cattleman have I heard of so many diseases, and you ought to see how lame, crippled, and weak many of the boys have gotten all of a sudden. The idea of a cowboy coming to me with a sore finger and asking to be let off for a day. There's Booley. Now I've known a horse to fall all over him, and once he rolled down a canyon. Never bothered him at all. He's got a blister on his heel, a riding blister, and he says it's going to blood poisoning if he doesn't rest. There's Jim Bell. He's developed what he says is spinal meningitis or some such like. There's Frankie Slade. He claimed he had scarlet fever because his face was so red. When I warned him that it was contagious and he needed to be quarantined, he denied it. However, he was extremely ill and just wanted to laze around and be entertained. Even Nels wasn't interested in working these days. If it wasn't for Norris, who had experience with the cattle, I wouldn't know what to do. Vienna asked, "What's with all this sudden illness and idleness?" Stillwell replied, "Well, you see, every cowboy on the range except Norris thinks it's his duty to entertain the ladies." Dorothy Coombs chimed in, "I think that's just fine," and everyone laughed. Melissa asked, "So Norris doesn't care to help entertain us?" Stillwell explained, "Norris is different from the other cowboys. He used to be just like them. He was always full of mischief. But he's changed since becoming foreman. All the responsibility is on him, so he has no time for amusing the ladies." "I suppose that's our loss," said Lorraine Wayne earnestly. "I admire him." Vienna reassured Stillwell, "You needn't be so distressed by the boy's gallantry, even if it causes temporary confusion in the work." He replied, "Miss Princess, what I said is only half or a quarter or nothing of what's troubling me." "Well then, tell us," Vienna encouraged. "The cowboys, except for Jean, have gone crazy over this game of golf," Stillwell exclaimed. Everyone burst out laughing. "Oh, Stillwell, you're joking," Vienna said, but he insisted, "I hope to die if I'm not dead serious. It's an incredibly strange fact. Just ask Flo, she'll tell you." Florence nodded in agreement as Stillwell spoke about cowboys and their determination to see things through. When asked for her opinion, she said that Stillwell was right on the money. Cowboys approached everything with the same passion they had for their work and their fights. They were simple, but in the best possible way. Vienna was pleased to hear that the cowboys were taking an interest in golf. They needed some form of entertainment, and golf seemed like a good fit. Stillwell, however, was more practical. He pointed out that if they were going to keep raising cattle at her princess's rancho, they needed to find ways to keep the cowboys occupied. Vienna knew that Stillwell was not one to exaggerate, but she also knew that the cowboys had a mischievous streak. They had played pranks on her guests before, and she was not sure if this sudden interest in golf was a genuine one or just another joke. Stillwell went on to talk about how the cowboys had worked hard to create a golf course on the mesa. They had been curious about the game and had even wanted to be caddies for Vienna and her brother. Monty Price had been the most enthusiastic, and he had taken the lead in getting the cowboys interested in the game. Vienna listened to Stillwell's story, unsure of what to make of it. She knew that the cowboys were capable of surprising her, and she could only hope that this sudden interest in golf was a sign of their willingness to try new things. Despite my age and experience with cowboy eccentricities, I was shocked when I heard that little hobble-footed, burned-up Montana cowpuncher claim that there wasn't any game too grand for him, and that golf was just his speed. He was completely serious, mind you, and he was always practicing. When Norris put him in charge of the course and the clubhouse, as well as all those funny sticks, Monty was thrilled. You see, Monty was sensitive about the fact that he wasn't much good anymore for cowboy work. He was happy to have a job that he didn't feel he was hanging on to by a thread. Well, he practiced the game, read the books in the clubhouse, and got the boys to do the same. That wasn't too difficult, I suppose. They played early and late, even in the moonlight. For a while, Monty was the coach, and the boys put up with it. But eventually, Frankie Slade got overconfident in his game and had to challenge Monty. Well, Monty beat him badly, and then one by one the other boys took on Monty, and he beat them all. After that, they split up and started playing matches, 2 on a side. This worked out well for a while, but cowboys can never be satisfied for long unless they win all the time. Monty and Link Stevens, both of them cripples, you might say, joined forces and decided to beat all challengers. Well, they did, and that's where the trouble started. The other cowboys tried to beat them, patient and determined as they were, but they couldn't manage it. Maybe if Monty and Link had been perfectly healthy like the other cowboys, there wouldn't have been such an uproar. But no self-respecting cowboy would ever tolerate a disgrace like that. Down at the bunks in the evenings, it's downright humiliating to hear Monty and Link boast about their victories over the rest of the outfit. They've become insufferably arrogant. It was impossible to reach Monty with a trimmed spruce pole, and Link, well, he was just incredibly scornful. "It's a great game, isn't it?" said Link with a powerful, sarcastic tone. "What's bothering you, you low-down cowman? You keep harping on Monty's game leg and on my game leg. If we had good legs, we'd beat you all the worse. It's brains that win in golf. brains and aristocratic blood, which you fellers sure have little of." "Then Monty blows smoke with careless superiority," he continued. "Sure, it's a great game. You cow-headed gents think beef and brawn should have the call over skill and gray matter. You'll all have to back up and get down. Go out and learn the game. You don't know a baffy from a Chinese sandwich. All you can do is waggle with a club and fozzle the ball." Whenever Monty starts using those strange names, the boys go kind of crazy. Monty and Link have the books and directions of the game, and they won't let the other boys see them. They show the rules, but that's all. And of course every game ends in a fight almost before it started. The boys are all terribly serious about this golf. And I want to say, for the good of ranching, not to mention a possible fight, that Monty and Link have to be beaten. There'll be no peace around this ranch until that's done. Vienna's guests were highly amused. As for herself, in spite of her barely considered doubt, Stillwell's tale of woe caused her anxiety. However, she couldn't control her laughter. "What in the world can I do?" she asked. "Well, I reckon I couldn't say. I only came to you for advice. It seems that a strange kind of game has taken over my cowboys, and for the time being ranching is at a standstill. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but cowboys are as strange as wild cattle." The conceit of Monty and Link had to be taken out, that much was clear. Vienna suggested a match game, a foursome, between Monty, Link, and Stillwell's best-picked team. Mountcastle, an expert golfer, would umpire the game. Vienna and her friends would take turns as caddies for Stillwell's team, which was considered weaker. Caddies could coach, and perhaps expert advice was all that was necessary for Stillwell's team to defeat Monty's. Stillwell was pleased with the idea and agreed to ride out to the links with everyone that afternoon. Vienna's guests were highly amused and took sides, making wagers on their choice. They were nonplussed by the singular character of American cowboys, and Vienna was pleased to note how seriously they had taken Stillwell's story. The June days were hot, and Vienna's visitors had learned to indulge in a restful siesta during the heated term of the day. Vienna was awakened by Princess's whistle and pounding on the gravel, followed by the sound of the other horses. The afternoon's prospect filled her with both fear and delight. As she stepped outside, Vienna was greeted by her friends, all dressed up in golf attire and beaming with excitement. Mountcastle stood out in his stunning golf coat, which made Vienna feel a bit uneasy about what Monty, Nels, and Nick might do under its influence. Melissa called out to Vienna, urging her to try a flying mount on her horse, Princess, which everyone wanted to see. Vienna hesitated, explaining that she needed Princess to kneel for her to reach the stirrup, but eventually gave in to her friend's laughter and insistence. After everyone else had mounted their horses, Vienna made Princess kneel and then hopped onto the saddle with the help of the horse's mane, pommel, and bridle. She then asked Florence, the Western girl, to demonstrate a cowboy's flying mount, which she executed with ease and grace. The group then headed towards the mesa, with Vienna scanning the cowboys for her foreman, Gene Norris, whom she hoped would attend the match. However, he was nowhere to be found, and Vienna couldn't help feeling disappointed and annoyed that he wasn't there for her guests, especially Melissa, who had wanted to see him. But Norris was busy with the cattle, and Vienna couldn't do anything about it. Vienna felt ashamed of her momentary lapse into her old habit of desiring things without reason, and thought of Norris no more as she surveyed the group of cowboys on the links. She counted 16 cowboys, not including Stillwell, and the same number of splendid horses, all shiny and clean, grazed on the rim in the care of Mexican lads. The cowboys were dressed in their finest attire, looking very different from how cowboys usually appeared, at least in Vienna's eyes. But to her guests they were real and natural, so picturesque that they could have been stage cowboys instead of real ones. Sombreros with silver buckles and horsehair bands were in evidence, and bright silk scarfs, embroidered vests, fringed and ornamented chaps, huge swinging guns, and clinking silver spurs lent a festive appearance. Vienna and her party were eagerly surrounded by the cowboys, and she found it difficult to repress a smile. If these cowboys were still remarkable to her, what must they be to her guests? "Well, y'all raced over, I seen," said Stillwell, taking Vienna's bridle. Get down, we're sure amazing glad and proud. And, Miss Princess, I'm offering to beg pardon for the way the boys are packing guns. Maybe it ain't polite, but it's Norris's orders." "Norris's orders," echoed Vienna. Her friends were suddenly silent. I reckon he won't take no chances on the boys being surprised sudden by raiders. And there's raiders operating in from the Guadalupes, that's all. Nothing to worry over. I was just explaining. Vienna, with several of her party, expressed relief, but Melissa showed excitement and then disappointment. "Oh, I want something to happen," she cried. 16 pairs of keen cowboy eyes fastened intently upon her pretty, petulant face, and Vienna divined, if Melissa did not, that the desired consummation was not far off. "So do I," said Dot Coombs. "I want a real adventure," said one of the girls, and the attention of the 16 cowboys turned to her. Another girl laughed, and Stillwell, the boss of the outfit, smiled. "Well, I won't let you ladies go home unhappy," he said. "This may not be exciting to you, but it's important to us. Look over there. You see those two guys? They're Monty Price and Link Stevens. They're too good to hang out with their old friends now that they're practicing for a tournament. They don't want my boys to see how they handle their clubs." Vienna asked if a team had been picked. Stillwell, wiping his face with a bandana, admitted that it was a difficult task. "I have 16 boys and they all want to play," he said. "It might not be healthy either. Nels and Nick said that if they don't play, there won't be a game at all. Nick has never played before, and Nels just wants to take a swing at Monty with a club." Vienna suggested that they let all the boys drive from the tee and choose the two who drive the farthest. Stillwell was pleased with the idea and dismissed the cowboys to go take a swing at a little white ball. Choosing the right club and who should go first proved to be quite a challenge. They had to draw lots to decide. Frankie Slade tried multiple times to hit the ball from the teeing ground, but his attempts were unsuccessful, sending the ball only a few yards. This made the other players hesitant to follow suit. Stillwell had to push Booley forward, who executed a poor shot that resulted in laughter from his comrades. Several cowboys attempted to make a good drive, but it proved to be difficult. "Well, Nick, it's your turn," said Stillwell. "Bill, I'm not too keen on playing," replied Nick. "Why, you were just talking about it a while ago." "Are you afraid to show how bad you'll play?" teased Stillwell. "Nope, just plain consideration for my fellow cowpunchers," answered Nick. "I appreciate how bad they play, and I'm not mean enough to show them up." "Well, you've got to show me," said Stillwell. "I know you've never seen a golf club in your life. What's more, I'll bet you can't hit that little ball square, not in a dozen tries." "Bill, I'm also too much of a gentleman to take your money, but you know I'm from Missouri. Give me a club," replied Nick confidently. Nick's confidence wavered as he took up and handled the clubs one by one, clearly showing that he had never wielded one before. However, he was not the type to give up easily. Finally, he selected a driver, looked doubtfully at the small knob, and stepped into position on the teeing ground. Nick Steele stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and had the wiry slenderness of a rider, yet he was broad-shouldered and had long arms, making him an incredibly powerful man. He swung the driver aloft and whirled it down with a tremendous swing. Crack! The white ball disappeared, and a tiny cloud of dust rose from where it had been. Vienna had her eyes fixed on the ball as it flew past her to the right. It was moving fast and low, almost like a bullet. The ball soared in the air, its flight path graceful and swift, before slowing down and then curving and dropping out of sight behind the mesa. Vienna had never witnessed a shot like that before. It was breathtaking and seemed too good to be true. The cowboys' cheers brought Nick Steele out of his trance, and he looked around at Stillwell and the others with a smug expression. Nick leaned nonchalantly on his club and surveyed the group. After a moment, he spoke up. "You all saw that, right? Thought I was joking, didn't you? I used to play this game in St. Louis and Kansas City. They even talked about taking me down east to play the champions. But golf's too easy for me. Those guys back in Missouri were a bunch of losers. They always complained whenever I hit the ball hard and lost it. I had to play left-handed to stay in their league. I hit that ball off the mesa just to show you guys. I wouldn't be caught dead playing on your team." Nick walked away towards the horses, leaving Stillwell looking crushed. No one said anything to Nick, but the lack of response spoke volumes about his victory. Suddenly, Nels stepped forward, his face inscrutable. As they gathered around, he mentioned to Stillwell and the other cowboys that it could be difficult to judge the talents of cowboys like Nick and himself. He picked up the club that Nick had used and called for a new ball. Stillwell built a little mound of sand and placed the ball on top, then stepped back to watch. Nels was smaller than Nick, but he was still quick and strong. He stepped up to the ball with confidence and swung with all his might. However, he missed the ball completely and fell over, spinning on his head. The cowboys laughed, and even Vienna and her guests couldn't help but join in. Nels was upset and gave Vienna a reproachful look. His second attempt was just as bad, and the cowboys taunted him. Nels was angry and swung again, but the ball only rolled a few inches. He had to build up the sand mound and replace the ball himself. The cowboys made fun of him, saying his eyes were bad and he couldn't hit the ball. Nels tried again, but failed once more. He finally gathered himself together and swung carefully, making a beautiful curve around the ball. He blamed his failure on the club, saying it was crooked. He switched clubs, but he still couldn't hit the ball. Frustration boiled inside him, and he swung with reckless abandon. No matter where he aimed, the ball always seemed to elude him. Stillwell, the large cowboy, hunched over and laughed uproariously. The other cowboys joined in, jumping up and down with glee. "You can't hit that ball," one of them taunted. Nels made a few more futile attempts, but it was no use. He finally gave up, realizing that golf was not his forte. Stillwell continued to laugh. "Oh, ha, 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 Nels, your old eyes aren't any good." Nels slammed down his club and straightened up, his face turning red with anger. But then his true pride and spirit shone through. He deliberately walked 10 paces away and turned toward the ball. His arm shot down, elbow crooked, hand like a claw. "This is fun, Nels," Stillwell yelled. But before anyone could react, Nels swiftly drew his gun and fired. The ball tumbled from the mound, chips flying from the impact. Nels had hit it without raising any dust. He then calmly put his gun back in its sheath and faced the cowboys. "Maybe my eyes aren't so bad after all," he said coolly, and started to walk away. Stillwell called out to him, "Hey, Nels, we came here to play golf. You can't just shoot the ball." Nels stopped in his tracks. "What are you so mad about? It's just a game," Stillwell continued. "Now you and Nick stick around and be sociable. We appreciate your company and your usefulness on occasion, and if you don't have enough manners to be courteous to the ladies, just remember Norris's orders." "Norris's orders?" Nels asked, surprised. "That's right," Stillwell replied curtly. "His orders. Are you forgetting them? Well, you're not much of a cowboy if you can't remember orders." "You and Nick and Monty especially are to follow orders," said Nels sternly, removing his hat and scratching his head. "Bill, I'm sorry, I forgot. I was angry. I would have remembered soon and maybe apologized." "Of course you would have," replied Stillwell. "Well, it seems like we're not making much progress with my golf team. Next player, step up." Stillwell found some skill in Ambrose, who was the first to play. However, the following players were so poor and evenly matched that Stillwell became frustrated quickly. He lost his temper just as quickly as Nels had. Finally, Ed Linton's wife arrived with Ambrose's wife, and this seemed to help. Suddenly, Ed showed a remarkable ability that caught Stillwell's attention. "Let me give you some advice," said Bill. "Sure, if you want," replied Ed, "but I know more about this game than you do." "Well, let's see you hit a straight ball, then. It seems like you got good real quick." "It's amazing," said Bill, looking around to see the two young wives smiling proudly at their husbands. Ed made several attempts, which were better than his predecessors, but Stillwell was still not satisfied. After a particularly bad shot, Stillwell walked around in distress before stopping a dozen paces away from the teeing ground. Ed, who was a somewhat phlegmatic cowboy, calmly prepared for another attempt. "Four," he called out. Stillwell stared at him. "Four," yelled Ed again. "Why are you shouting at me like that?" demanded Bill. "I mean for you to move out of the way, get back from in front." "Oh, that was one of those crazy words Monty is always yelling," said Bill. "Well, I guess I'm safe here then." "You couldn't hit me if you tried for a million years," taunted Bill as he prepared to swing his golf club. "Come on, Bill, give it a rest," urged Ed. "I've already told you that you can't hit a straight shot. Don't break your back trying." Ed was a short, stocky man with muscles that bulged from his arms. He had always been a strong player, but now he was ready to show off his skills. The other cowboys watched in silence as Ed swung his club, the force of it making a whistling sound. Crack! A loud thump followed as the ball hit Stillwell's body, causing him to groan in pain. The cowboys erupted in laughter, their joy expressed in wild dancing and howling. Stillwell eventually composed himself and admitted defeat. "You win, Ed. You hit a straight shot and I was in the way. You're the captain now." He then called out to their opponents, Monty and Link, challenging them to come and play. "We're waiting for you, you fancy golfers. Don't be scared." Monty and Link, two confident players, quickly accepted the challenge and made their way over to the Cowboys. Stillwell turned to Vienna and her friends, hoping they wouldn't switch sides. "I hope you won't weaken and join the enemy. Monty is quite persuasive and has a way of getting people to agree with him." "It's a fair deal," Ambrose declared, "because he wouldn't lend us the book that shows how to play. And besides, we need to beat him. Now, if you'll elect who's going to be the caddies and umpire, I'll be grateful." Vienna's friends found the idea of the upcoming match highly amusing, but they were not interested in taking part. Vienna appointed Mountcastle as the judge of the play, Dorothy as the caddy for Ed Linton, and herself as the caddy for Ambrose. Stillwell announced the news to his team and supporters with great enthusiasm, just as Monty and Link arrived. Monty and Link were both small, bow-legged, and had a limp in one foot, making them unimpressive at first glance. Link was young, while Monty was much older, but it was difficult to estimate his age. Stillwell described him as being as burnt and hard as a cinder. Monty always wore heavy sheepskin chaps with the wool outside, which made him appear wider than he was long. Link preferred leather and had taken to wearing it entirely since he became Vienna's chauffeur. Link carried no weapon, while Monty wore a large gun sheath and gun. Link smoked a cigarette and looked insolent, while Monty was swaggering and had a dark face, looking like a barbarian chief. "Monty gives me the creeps," Melissa whispered to Stillwell. "Is he as dangerous as I've heard? Has he ever killed anyone?" "Sure," replied Stillwell cheerfully. "Almost as many as Nels." "And is that nice Mr. Nels also a desperado? I wouldn't have thought so. He's so gentle and old-fashioned with a soft voice." "Nels is a prime example of the duplicity of men, Miss Melissa. Don't let his soft voice fool you. He's as dangerous as a sidewinder rattlesnake." At that moment, Monty and Link arrived at the teeing ground, and Stillwell went out to greet them, with the other Cowboys following closely behind. Stillwell's voice reached Vienna's ears, explaining that his team would be receiving skilled advice during the game. Suddenly, a loud, angry roar erupted from the center of the group, followed by a cacophony of excited voices. Monty Price emerged, breaking free from restraining hands, and strode towards Vienna. Monty was the type of cowboy who never spoke to women unless spoken to first, and even then he answered in blunt, awkward shyness. But on this occasion it seemed he meant to protest or plead with Vienna, as he showed clear signs of emotional distress. Vienna had never really gotten to know Monty, and she was a little intimidated, if not outright scared of him. She knew she had to be careful with him, more so than any of the other cowboys on her ranch. Monty removed his sombrero, something he had never done before, and in that single instant Vienna saw that his head was entirely bald. This was one of the hallmarks of the terrible Montana prairie fire, which he had fought to save the life of a child. Vienna couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration for him, but she knew she had to keep her wits about her. "Miss Florentino," Monty began, stammering, "I'm extending my greetings to you and your friends. Link and I are proud to play the match game with you watching, but Bill says you're going to caddy for his team and coach them on the fine points, and I want to ask respectfully if that's fair and square." "Monty, that is for you to say," replied Vienna. "It was my suggestion, but if you object in the least, of course we shall withdraw." "It seems fair to me," said Monty, "because you've learned the game. You're an expert, and I understand the other boys have no chance with you. Then you've coached Link. I think it would be sportsmanlike of you to accept the handicap." "Aw, a handicap," exclaimed Bill. "That's what you were driving at. Why didn't you say so? Every time Bill comes to a word that's pie to us old golfers, he just stumbles. Miss Princess, you've made it all clear as print. And I may say with becoming modesty that you weren't mistaken about me being sportsmanlike. Link and I were born that way, and we accept the handicap. Lacking that handicap, I reckon Link and I would have no ambition to play our most beautiful game. And thanking you, Miss Princess, and all your friends, I want to add that if Bill's outfit couldn't beat us before, they've got a swell chance now with you ladies watching me and Link." Monty had seemed to expand with pride as he delivered this speech, and at the end he bowed low and turned away. He joined the group around Stillwell. Once more there was animated discussion, argument, and expostulation. One of the cowboys came from Mountcastle and led him away to explain ground rules. It seemed to Vienna that the game never would begin. She strolled on the rim of the mesa, arm in arm with Lorraine Wayne, and while Lorraine talked, she looked out over the gray valley leading to the rugged black mountains and the vast red wastes. In the foreground on the gray slope, she saw cattle in movement and cowboys riding to and fro. She thought of Norris. Then Boyd Harvey came for them, saying all details had been arranged. Stillwell met them halfway, and this cool, dry old cattleman, whose face and manner scarcely changed at the announcement of a cattle raid, now showed extreme agitation. "Well, Miss Princess, we've gone and made a fool of ourselves right at the start," he said dejectedly. "What's the problem?" Vienna asked, trying to suppress her laughter at Stillwell's distress. "Well, it's like this," he began. "That darn Monty is as sly as a fox. After he finished boasting about the handicap he and Link were happy to take, he brought Mountcastle over here and drove us all crazy with his silly golf names. Then he borrowed Mountcastle's golf coat. I say borrowed loosely. He practically ripped it off the Englishman. Although I won't deny that Castleton was agreeable when he figured out Monty's plan, which was simply to break Ambrose's heart. That coat dazzles Ambrose. You know how vain he is. He would die to wear that Englishman's golf coat, and Monty beat him to it. It's sad to see the look in Ambrose's eyes. He won't be able to play much, but that's not all. Monty got to Ed Linton, too. Usually Ed is easygoing and cool, but now he's on a rampage. You might not know this, but Ed's wife is terribly jealous of him. Ed used to be a real ladies' man. So Monty goes over and tells Beulah, Ed's wife, that he's going to have the lovely Miss Dorothy with the wild eyes as his caddy. It might not be the most respectful thing to say, but let me tell you, Miss Dorothy has a pair of unbridled eyes. Maybe it's just natural for her to look at a guy like that. It's all right, I'm not saying anything. I know it's perfectly normal for girls back east to use their eyes. But out here it's bound to end in disaster. All the boys talk about is Miss Dot's eyes, and they brag about which guy is the luckiest. Ed's wife was aware of the situation, as Monty had informed her that it was all right for her to come and see how Ed was strutting around under the light of Miss Dot's brown eyes. Beulah called out to Ed and figuratively roped him for a minute. Ed returned, hugging a grudge as big as a hill. It was hilarious. He was going to punch Monty's head off. Monty stood there and laughed, sarcastically saying, "Ed, we all knew you were a married man, but you're crazy to give yourself away." That settled Ed. He was touchy about the way Beulah henpecked him. He lost his spirit, and now he couldn't play marbles, let alone golf. Monty was too smart, and I reckon he was right about brains being what wins. The game began, and at first Vienna and Dorothy tried to direct their respective players' efforts. However, all they said and did only made their team play worse. By the third hole, they were far behind and hopelessly bewildered. With Monty's borrowed coat, which had a dazzling effect on Ambrose, Link's repeated allusion to Ed's marital status, Stillwell's vociferated disgust, the cowboy supporters clamoring good intentions and pursuit, and the ladies' embarrassing presence, Ambrose and Ed played through all sorts of strange moves until it became ridiculous. "Hey, Link!" Monty's voice boomed over the links. "Our esteemed rivals are playing shinny." Vienna and Dorothy eventually gave up when the game became a rout, and they sat down with their followers to watch the fun. By hook or crook, Ed and Ambrose forged ahead and came close to catching up to Monty and Link. Mountcastle disappeared into a mass of gesticulating, shouting cowboys. When that compact mass disintegrated, Mountcastle emerged rather hastily, it seemed, to stalk back toward his hostess and friends. "Look!" exclaimed Melissa in delight. "Mountcastle is actually excited. Whatever did they do to him?" "This is huge!" exclaimed Mountcastle, looking disheveled yet excited. "By golly, that was some crazy golf game. I even had to quit my job as the referee." After some coaxing, he finally revealed the reason for his resignation. "Here's what happened, you see. They were all gathered over there, keeping an eye on each other. Monty Price's ball fell into a hazard, and he moved it to get a better position. But guess what? They were all doing it. Meanwhile, the game was heating up over yonder. Stillwell and his cowboys saw Monty cheat, and all hell broke loose. They turned to me for a verdict. I showed them the rules, and Monty admitted his mistake. However, when it came to putting his ball back in the hazard, he refused to do it properly. Instead, he put it wherever he pleased and gave me a threatening look. 'Listen, Duke,' he said. I wish that darn cowboy wouldn't call me that. Duke, maybe this game ain't as important as international politics or other stuff like that, but there's still some honor and sportsmanship at stake. Our opponents have been ignoring those values for a while now. The game is riding on my next shot. I'm putting my ball as close to where it was as I can. You saw where it was, just like I did. You're the referee, and I trust you to be fair. And let me tell you, nobody has ever doubted my word without regret. So I'm asking you, wasn't my ball lying about here? The little scoundrel grinned at me and rested his hand on his gun. You bet he did. And then I had to tell a big old lie. Mountcastle mimicked Monty's voice, but it was clear that he didn't realize Monty was joking. Vienna and her pals sensed it, though there was no need to hold back, so they unleashed their laughter and joy. Chapter 15. Vienna and her group regained their composure and sat up to watch the end of the match. Suddenly a loud yell pierced the air, and all the cowboys turned to see what was happening. A big black horse had appeared on the mesa and was galloping towards them. The rider shouted at the cowboys, who quickly ran towards their horses. Vienna was alarmed and said, "That's Norris. Something's wrong." Mountcastle stared, and the other men muttered uneasily. The women looked at Vienna with concerned eyes. The black horse ran faster and faster towards them, and Melissa cried out, "Look at that horse run! Look at that guy ride!" Everyone was impressed with the rider's skill, but Vienna was torn between her growing fear and her admiration for Norris. She knew that any violent action by him was significant and could mean anything. She remembered Stillwell's talk about fun, plots, and tricks, but she dismissed the idea. Norris wouldn't run his horse at such a speed unless there was a good reason. Vienna felt a mounting fear, not for herself but for her guests. She couldn't think of any danger except the guerrillas. She trusted Norris to face any danger and protect them. As he approached them, she could see his dark face and eyes, and she felt a strange sense of dependence on him. The massive black horse was so close to Vienna and her friends that when Norris tugged on the reins, the dust and sand kicked up by his pounding hooves flew in their faces. "Oh, Norris, what's going on?" cried Vienna. "Sorry for the scare, Miss Florentino," he replied, "but I'm in a hurry. There's a gang of bandits hiding on the ranch, probably in an abandoned hut. They robbed a train near Agua Prieta. Pat Haw is leading the posse that's after them, and you know Pat doesn't like us. I'm afraid it wouldn't be pleasant for you or your guests to run into either the posse or the bandits." "I agree," said Vienna, visibly relieved. "Let's hurry back to the house." They didn't say much after that, and Vienna's guests remained silent. Norris's actions and expression belied his calm words. His sharp eyes scanned the rim of the mesa, and his face was as hard and unyielding as chiseled bronze. Monty and Nick arrived, each leading several horses by their reins. Nels appeared behind them with Princess, struggling with the roan. Vienna noticed that all the other cowboys had vanished. One stern command from Norris calmed Vienna's horse, but the other horses were skittish and refused to stay still. The men mounted without incident, as did Vienna and Florence. However, Lorraine Wayne and Mrs. Beck were jittery and struggled to get on their horses. "Excuse me, but I'm in a hurry," said Norris coolly as he forced Dorothy's horse almost to its knees with an iron grip. Dorothy, who was athletic and brave, climbed onto the saddle. When Norris released his hold on the reins and mane, the horse reared up and began to buck wildly. Dorothy screamed as she flew into the air. Norris, as agile as the horse, sprang forward and caught Dorothy in his arms. She had fallen head first and would have been seriously injured if he hadn't caught her. Norris gently lifted Dorothy up and set her back on her feet, trying to keep her steady. Dorothy seemed more concerned with adjusting her riding habit than the fact that she had just been tossed off her horse. Vienna stifled a laugh, but quickly sobered up as she saw the anger in Norris's eyes. He had jumped at Dorothy's stubborn horse, determined to show his mastery over the animal. It was a cruel display, but necessary to get the horse under control. Once the horse was calmed, Dorothy mounted without any further trouble. Meanwhile, Nels and Nick had helped Melissa back onto her horse. "We'll take the side trail," said Norris shortly as he swung onto his big black horse. The other cowboys followed suit, trotting behind him. The mesa was only a short distance away, and Vienna knew that the steep trail would be a challenge for her guests. Mountcastle observed, "That's a jolly bad course," while the women were speechless. Norris checked his horse at the start of the trail and dismounted. "Boys, drop over and go slow," he instructed. "Flo, you follow. Now, ladies, let your horses loose and hold on. Lean forward and hang on to the pommel. It looks bad, but the horses are used to such trails." Melissa followed Florence closely, with Mrs. Beck and Lorraine Wayne close behind. Dorothy's horse balked. and she tried to urge him into the trail. Norris quickly grabbed the horse's bit and pulled him back down. "Put your foot in my stirrup," he told Dorothy. "We can't waste time." He lifted her up onto his horse and started down the trail. "Go on, Miss Florentino. I'll have to lead this nag down," he called after them. The group made their way down the narrow, rocky trail, with Norris leading the way and the other cowboys following behind. It was a treacherous journey, but they made it down safely. "We'll save time," Vienna said before dismounting from her horse. The trail was loose, and the horses struggled to keep their footing on the weathered slopes. Dust clouds formed and rocks rolled down, while cactus spikes tore at horse and rider. Mrs. Beck laughed, but there was a hint of hysteria in her tone. Dorothy complained a few times, and Vienna struggled to see through the yellow dust. The horses snorted, and she heard Norris close behind her, causing little avalanches that rolled down Princess's fetlocks. Vienna feared that Norris's legs might be cut or bruised by the stones. Eventually the dust thinned, and she saw the others ride out onto a level. Norris and Vienna followed suit, and there was a delay while Norris changed Dorothy from his horse to her own. This struck Vienna as odd and made her more thoughtful. The cowboy's alert and quiet manner was not reassuring, and as they resumed their ride, Nels and Nick rode far ahead, Monty stayed far behind, and Norris rode with the party. Vienna overheard Boyd Harvey ask Norris if lawlessness was common, and Norris replied that occasional deeds of outlawry might break out in any isolated section of the country, but there had been peace and quiet along the border for years. Vienna knew that they were being escorted home under armed guard. When they rounded the head of the mesa and saw the ranch house and the valley, Vienna saw dust or smoke hovering over a hut on the outskirts of the Mexican quarters. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the light began to wane, making it difficult for Vienna to see what was happening. Norris urged everyone to pick up the pace and get to the house as quickly as possible. Within minutes they had all arrived in the yard, ready to dismount. Stillwell greeted them with a forced cheerfulness that didn't fool Vienna in the slightest. She noticed a group of armed cowboys walking with their horses just below the house. "Well, you all had a nice little run," Stillwell said, trying to sound casual. "I reckon there wasn't much need for it. Pat Haw thinks he's got some outlaws corralled on the ranch. Nothing to be fussed up about. Norris is just being cautious and doesn't want you meeting any rowdies." Vienna's female guests breathed a sigh of relief as they dismounted and made their way into the house. Vienna stayed behind to speak with Stillwell and Norris. "Now, Stillwell, what's really going on?" Vienna asked, getting straight to the point. Stillwell was taken aback by her directness, but he couldn't help but admire her shrewdness. "Well, Miss Princess, there's going to be a fight somewhere, and Norris wanted to get you all inside before it happened. He says the valley's overrun by vaqueros, guerrillas, and robbers, and Lord knows what else." He clomped off the porch, his spurs jangling loudly, and headed toward the waiting cowboys. Norris remained behind, standing tall and silent, with a hand on his pommel and bridle. "Norris, you're always looking out for my best interests," Vienna said, wanting to thank him but struggling to find the right words. "I don't know what I'd do without you. Is there really danger?" "I'm not sure," Norris replied, "but I'd rather err on the side of caution." Vienna hesitated, suddenly finding it difficult to talk to him. "Can you tell me what special orders you gave Nels, Nick, and Monty?" she asked. "I overheard Stillwell mention something about it." Norris looked surprised. "Who said I gave them special orders?" "Stillwell did," Vienna replied. Norris sighed. "I suppose I can tell you if you insist." "Why worry about something that might never happen?" she asked. "I insist, Norris," she said quietly. "I was ordered to have at least one of them guarding you day and night, always within earshot of your voice." "I figured as much. But why Nels or Monty or Nick? That seems unfair to them. Why do I need someone to guard me? Don't you trust any of my cowboys?" Norris asked. "I trust them to be honest, but not with guns," she replied. "Ability with guns?" Norris exclaimed. "Miss Florentino, you've been entertaining your guests so well that you forget." "I'm glad you forget. I wish you hadn't asked me," she said. "Forget what?" Norris asked. "Don Carlos and his guerrillas," she said. "I haven't forgotten. Do you still think Don Carlos might try to take me again?" Norris asked. "I don't think, I know," she replied. "And on top of your other duties, you've been sharing the watch with these cowboys?" Norris asked. "Yes," she said. And it's been going on without my knowledge? Norris asked. Yes, she replied. Since when? Norris asked. Since I brought you down from the mountains last month, she replied. How long will it continue? Norris asked. That's hard to say, until the revolution is over at least, she replied. She looked away to the west, where the red haze was filling the great void. She believed in him completely, and the threat hovering near her cast a shadow over her happiness. What should I do? She asked. I think you should send your friends back east and go with them until this guerrilla war is over, Norris said. Why, Norris, they would be heartbroken, and so would I, she replied. He had no answer for that. If I don't take your advice, it'll be the first time since I've come to rely on you so much, she said. Can't you suggest something else? My friends are having such a wonderful visit. Melissa is getting better. I'd hate to see them leave before they're ready, he said. We could take them up to the mountains and camp out for a while. I know of a wild spot up among the crags. It's a tough climb, but it's worth it. I've never seen a more beautiful place. There's fine water and it'll be cool. Soon enough it'll be too hot for your group to be outside. Are you suggesting we hide away among the crags and clouds? Vienna asked with a laugh. Well, it would certainly seem that way. Your friends don't have to know. Maybe in a few weeks the border trouble will have died down for the fall. You say it's a tough climb up there? He asked. It definitely is. Your friends will get a real adventure on that trip. That works for me. Melissa especially wants something exciting to happen. They're all looking for some thrill. They'll find it up there. Treacherous trails, canyons to navigate, steep climbs, windstorms, thunder and lightning, rain, mountain lions, and wildcats. All right, I've made up my mind. Norris, you'll take charge, of course, but I can't help but wonder, Norris, if there's something else you could tell me. Why do you think my personal freedom is in danger? Yes, there is, but I can't say. If I hadn't been a rebel soldier, I wouldn't have known. If you hadn't been a rebel soldier, where would I be now? Vienna asked with earnestness. He didn't reply. Norris, she continued with a sudden burst of emotion, you once mentioned a debt you owed me. Seeing his dark face pale, she hesitated, then pressed on. It's paid. No, he answered huskily. Yes, I won't have it any other way. No, it can never be paid. Vienna extended her hand. It's paid, she repeated. Suddenly he recoiled from the outstretched white hand that held him captivated. I'd do anything to touch your hand, he said, his voice filled with unexpected passion. But not on the terms you offer. Vienna was taken aback by his words. No man has ever refused to shake my hand before, she said with a small laugh. It's hardly flattering, why won't you? It's not because I think you're offering it as mistress to servant, rancher to cowboy, he replied. Then why? She asked. The debt you owed me is paid. I cancel it, he said. But I won't shake your hand, that's all. Vienna was puzzled by his refusal. You're being ungracious, whatever your reason, she said. But I may offer it again someday. Good night. He said good night and left, his hand on the neck of his black horse. Vienna went inside to rest before dinner and fell asleep. When she woke up, it was twilight, and her Mexican maid had not come to her. She rang the bell, but there was no answer. The house was silent, and she felt a sense of foreboding. Footsteps on the porch broke the silence, and she recognized Stillwell's tread, though it was lighter than usual. He called softly into her office, and she hurried through the rooms to meet him. "Stillwell," she exclaimed, "is anyone with you?" "No," he replied in a low tone. "Please come out on the porch." Once outside, she saw his pale face and reached out to him. He intercepted her hand and held it tightly. "Miss Princess, I have some distressing news," the man spoke in a hushed tone, glancing around apprehensively. "If you'd heard Norris curse, you'd know how much we hate to have to tell you this. But it can't be avoided. The fact is, we're in a terrible situation. If your guests aren't scared out of their wits, it'll be because of your nerve and how you follow Norris's orders." "You can count on me," Vienna replied with resolve, though she couldn't help but tremble. "Well, here's the thing. That gang of bandits Pat Hall was chasing, they're hiding in your house," the man exclaimed. "In my house?" Vienna echoed, horrified. "It's the truth, and I'm ashamed to admit it. Norris is beside himself with rage that it could happen. You see, it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't taken the boys to the golf course and if Norris hadn't ridden out to the mesa after us. It's my fault. I've had too much female influence around me. Gene cursed me. He cursed me something terrible. But now we have to figure out what to do." "Do you mean to say that a gang of hunted outlaws have taken refuge in my house?" Vienna demanded. "That's exactly what I mean. It seems strange to me that you didn't notice something was wrong with all your servants gone." "Gone? I did notice my maid was missing. I wondered why there were no lights on. Where did my servants go?" "They went down to the Mexican quarters and are half scared to death. Now listen, when Norris left you an hour ago, he followed me straight to where the boys and I were trying to help Pat Haw find those bandits. But when Norris arrived, things got worse. Pat was already angry, but seeing Norris made him even more agitated. I think Gene and Pat's relationship is like trying to get a Red Bull to calm down. The sheriff started a fire in an old adobe hut, and Norris wasn't happy about it. Pat Haw had 6 guys with him, and it seemed like they were on a bandit hunting mission. There was a bit of a commotion, and things were looking bad, but Gene remained calm and controlled the boys. Pat and his deputies went on their hunt, but it ended up being a joke. Pat could have continued to fool us, but as soon as Norris showed up, the truth was revealed. Pat wasn't really looking for bandits, he just wanted trouble for Norris. When Pat's men made their way to our storehouse where we kept our supplies, Gene called a stop to it and told Pat to leave the ranch. This is where Haw and Norris had their conflict. It turned out that there was a gang of bandits hiding somewhere, and at first Pat was actively trying to find them, but then he suddenly changed his mind. He was flustered by Norris's scrutiny, and then, maybe to hide something, maybe just naturally, he got mad. He called for the law and brought up his old grudge against Norris, accusing him again of the greaser murder from last fall. Norris made him look like a fool and showed that he was scared of the bandits or had some other reason for leaving the trail. The argument started, and it could have turned into a fight if it weren't for Nels. In the middle of it all, when Norris was driving Pat and his crew off the ranch, one of the deputies lost his head and went for his gun. Nels threw his gun and injured the man's arm. Monty reacted quickly and threw 2 pistols, which made the situation tense for a moment. However, the bandits eventually retreated. Stillwell paused in his story, holding Vienna's hand as if to offer comfort. "After Pat left, we put our heads together," the old cattleman began with a deep breath. "We found a young man who had seen a group of men who he suspected were Mexican bandits, sneaking through the shrubbery to the back of the house. This was when Norris was out on the mesa. Later, the same young man saw your servants running down the hill towards the village. Gene thinks that there was some devilry going on along the railroad, and Pat Haw followed the bandits to the ranch. He searched hard, but then suddenly stopped. Norris says that Pat Haw wasn't scared, but perhaps he saw something or got wind of something that made him not want to catch all of the bandits. You understand? Then Gene came up with a plan. He went to Padre Marcos to get help in finding out what he could from your Mexican servants. I hurried up here to give you orders, Miss Princess. It's quite amazing, isn't it? You need to gather all of your guests in the kitchen and pretend that as your staff has left, it will be a fun experience for your guests to cook dinner. The kitchen is the safest room in the house. While you entertain your guests, I'll have cowboys stationed in the long corridor and outside where the kitchen connects to the main house. It's likely that the bandits don't suspect that we know where they are hiding." Norris informed them that their guests were in the end room with the alfalfa and would be leaving in the night. He assured Vienna that with him and the boys watching, they would be safe to go to bed. They were to wake their guests early before daylight and head up into the mountains. Vienna was to tell them to pack their outfits before going to bed and say that their servants had left, so they might as well go camping with the cowboys. Norris hoped their friends would never know they were sitting on a powder mine. Vienna asked Stillwell if he advised the trip up into the mountains. He replied that he did, considering everything. He asked if Vienna would keep her nerve, and she answered yes. He suggested that she tell Florence, who would be a comfort to her. Vienna did not return to her room, but went through the office and into the long corridor, which was almost as dark as night. She thought she saw a slow-gliding figure that was darker than the surrounding gloom. She went to the kitchen and lit some lights, then went back into the corridor and saw a dark shape crouching along the wall. She thought it might be her imagination and went on through her rooms into the patio. Her guests were happy to go camping with the cowboys and entered into the spirit of the occasion. Vienna delayed at the door, taking a sharp but unobtrusive glance down the great barn-like hall. She saw nothing but blank, dark space. Out of nowhere, a pale face appeared just a foot away from Vienna, breaking the darkness that enveloped her. It was Don Carlos, and his glittering eyes were unmistakable. Vienna managed to hide her alarm and anger and calmly shut the door, securing it with a heavy bolt. Her initial shock soon gave way to fury. How dare he enter her home without permission? Was he one of the bandits hiding in her house? Just as she was working herself up into a frenzy, Florence appeared, having seen Vienna bolt the door. Vienna quickly composed herself and assigned tasks to her guests. She confided in Florence about Don Carlos and was shown a group of cowboys moving stealthily outside the window. Excitement replaced her anger and fear, and Vienna decided to have some fun. She called Mountcastle into the pantry and playfully pressed her flour-covered hands onto his coat. The rest of the group joined in the revelry, and everyone pitched in to make a hodgepodge dinner that turned out to be surprisingly delicious. Vienna enjoyed herself despite the looming threat of danger. As the night grew late, Vienna instructed her guests to retire to their rooms and prepare for the upcoming camping trip. She hoped it would be the highlight of their western adventure. Vienna herself began to gather her camping gear when she heard a knock on her door. Assuming it was Florence coming to assist her, Vienna was surprised to find Norris and several cowboys waiting outside. Norris explained that the bandits were still in the area and that they had likely learned of their plans. However, he assured Vienna that they would be able to leave before any trouble began. He also mentioned that he had spoken to Vienna's servants, who had run off in fear. They would return once the gang had been dealt with, and Vienna need not worry about her property. When Vienna asked if Norris had any idea who was hiding in the house, he initially suspected Pat Haw. But upon finding several horses hidden in the mesquite behind the pond, he believed it to be a group of outcasts from the border. Norris assured Vienna that they would be able to get rid of them without any violence. Despite the potential danger, Vienna trusted Norris and felt grateful to have him on her side. She knew that if anyone could handle the situation, it was him. Vienna spoke up, determined to make Norris see reason. "Norris, you're wrong," she said boldly. He was taken aback and paused before responding. His eyes shifted, and he eventually spoke. "How so?" he asked. "I saw one of these bandits. I distinctly recognized him," Vienna explained. Norris took a long step towards her. "Who was he?" he demanded. "Don Carlos," Vienna replied. Norris muttered under his breath, his expression darkening. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low. "Absolutely. I saw his figure twice in the hall, then his face in the light. I could never mistake his eyes," Vienna confirmed. "Did he know you saw him?" Norris asked, his tone urgent. "I'm not positive, but I think so. Oh, he must have known. I was standing full in the light. I had entered the door, then purposely stepped out. His face showed from around a corner and swiftly flashed out of sight," Vienna recounted. Vienna watched as Norris underwent a transformation, his demeanor shifting drastically. "Call your friends, get them in here," he ordered, his voice terse. He turned towards the door. "Norris, wait!" Vienna called out, trying to stop him. He turned back to her, his face white with anger and determination. "What will you do?" Vienna asked. "That needn't concern you. Get your party in here, bar the windows and lock the doors. You'll be safe," Norris replied curtly. "Norris, tell me what you intend to do," Vienna pleaded. "I won't tell you," Norris replied, turning away once more. "But I will know," Vienna said, her hand on his arm. She saw the shock in his eyes as she touched him. "Oh, I do know. You mean to fight," she exclaimed. "Well, Miss Florentino, isn't it about time?" Norris asked wearily. "The fact of that Mexican's presence here in your house ought to prove to you the nature of the case. These cowboys, these rebels, they know that you won't tolerate any fighting from your men. Don Carlos is a cowardly sneak, but he's not afraid to hide in your own home. He knows that you won't let your cowboys harm anyone, and he's taking advantage of it. He'll steal, burn, and run off with your belongings. He'll even kill if he has the chance. These greasers are known to use knives in the dark. So I ask you, isn't it time to put a stop to him?" "Norris, I forbid you to fight unless it's in self-defense. I forbid it," Vienna said firmly. "What I plan to do is self-defense. Haven't I explained to you that we're living in wild times along this border? Don Carlos is in league with the revolution. The rebels are crazy to stir up trouble in the United States. You're a woman of importance, Vienna. Don Carlos would take you and run. If he got you, it wouldn't matter if he crossed the border with you. The hue and cry would go out to the troops along the border, to New York, to Washington. It would mean exactly what the rebels want. United States intervention. In other words, war," Norris explained. "Oh, surely you're exaggerating," Vienna said. "Maybe so, but I'm starting to see what Don Carlos is up to. And Vienna, I can't bear to think of what you'd go through if he got you over the line. I know these low-caste Mexicans. I've been among the peons, the slaves," Norris said. "Norris, don't let Don Carlos take me," Vienna pleaded. "I won't. That's why I'm going after him," Norris replied, his face hardening. "But I told you not to start a fight on purpose," Vienna reminded him. "Then I'll start one without your permission," Norris said shortly and began to walk away. Vienna caught his arm and held on even when he stopped. "No," she said with authority. He shook off her grip and walked forward. "Please don't go," she called out pleadingly. However, he continued. "Norris!" She ran ahead of him, intercepted him, and stood in front of him with her back against the door. He extended his arm as if to push her aside, but it dropped. Haggard, worried, with a face that showed signs of strain, he stood before her. "It's for your own good," he protested. "If it's for my sake, then do what I want," she said. "These guerrillas will harm someone. They'll set the house on fire. They'll take you away. They'll do something terrible if we don't stop them. Let's take the risk," she begged. "But it's a huge risk, and we shouldn't take it," he exclaimed passionately. "I know what's best here. Stillwell supports me. Let me out, Miss Florentino. I'm going to take the boys and go after these guerrillas." "No." "Good Lord," Norris exclaimed. "Why not let me go? It's the right thing to do. I'm sorry to upset you and your visitors. Why not put an end to Don Carlos's harassment? Is it because you're worried that a commotion will ruin your friend's visit?" "It's not that this time," she replied. "Then is it because of the thought of a little shooting with these Mexicans?" "No." "You're disgusted by the idea of Mexican blood staining your home's floors?" "No." "Then why are you preventing me from doing what I know is best?" "Norris, she stammered, growing more agitated. "I'm scared and confused. This is all too much for me. I'm not a coward. If you have to fight, you'll see that I'm not a coward. But your approach seems so reckless. The hall is so dark and the guerrillas could shoot from behind doors. You're so wild and daring that you'd rush into danger. Is that necessary? I mean, I don't know why I feel so uneasy about you doing it." "I'm just worried about you getting hurt," Vienna confessed. Her words seemed to have a powerful effect on him, as his hard expression softened and his face flushed with emotion. He was like a shy boy, unsure of how to react to her sudden vulnerability. Vienna believed she had won him over, but he surprised her yet again with his next move. He pushed her aside so he could pass, and she realized he would have no qualms about physically removing her if necessary. As he stood in the doorway, his eyes gleamed with a ruthless determination. "I'm going to kick Don Carlos and his gang out of this place," Norris declared. "I'll try to do it peacefully, but if I have to fight, so be it. Either way, they're leaving." Chapter 16. As Norris left through one door, Florence knocked on another. Vienna, usually calm and collected, was visibly relieved to see the cool Western girl. Just having her nearby helped Vienna regain her composure. Florence looked at Vienna closely, then changed her demeanor to something sweeter and more deliberate. Although Florence was probably curious about the bandits hiding in the house, the cowboys' plans, and Vienna's suppressed emotions, she didn't ask any questions. Instead, she brought up the important topic of what to bring on their camping trip. They discussed the necessary items for an hour, selected the things they needed most, and packed them in Vienna's duffel bags. With everything packed, they decided to lie down and rest before the call to saddle. They remained in their riding costumes and tried to sleep, or at least relax, until it was time to go. Vienna switched off the lamp and peeked through her window, observing dark shapes standing guard in the darkness. As she lay down, she heard soft footsteps on the path. Her loyalty to Norris swelled her heart, while the necessity of it foreshadowed the ominous feeling that had been haunting her since his passionate plea. Vienna didn't expect to sleep, but she did, and it felt like only a moment until Florence woke her up. She followed Florence outside, where she saw saddled horses being held by cowboys in the dark hour before dawn. The departure had an air of urgency and secrecy. Melissa, who came out with Vienna's other guests, whispered that it felt like an escape, and she was thrilled. The others were amused, but to Vienna it was indeed an escape. In the darkness, Vienna couldn't see how many escorts her party had, but she heard low voices, the chomping of bits and thumping of hooves. She recognized Norris as he led Princess over for her to mount. Then the soft pattering of feet and whining of dogs followed, and Vienna saw her pack of Russian wolfhounds approaching. Norris's decision to let them go with her indicated how attentive he was to her happiness. She loved being out with the hounds and her horse. Norris led Princess out into the darkness, past a line of mounted horses. "Guess we're ready," he said. "I'll do a head count." He walked back along the line, and on his return, Vienna heard him say several times, "Now everybody ride close to the horse in front and keep quiet till daylight." Then the snorting and pounding of the big black horse in front of her told Vienna that Norris had mounted. "All right, we're off," he called. Vienna lifted Princess's bridle and let the roan go.